Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Whatever else we say about this passage and its application, we have to deal with these questions. Let's begin with some context, though, both here and with the immediately following story in chapter 5. Jesus himself had initiated this voyage. His boat and a flotilla of other boats were headed to a non-Jewish region called the Decapolis, which in Greek means 10 cities. These urban centers had been established a couple of centuries earlier after Alexander the Great had conquered much of the civilized world, which to them meant Greece, Egypt, all of the Middle East, even to half of India. Alexander had made Greek the international language, the language of the New Testament and of the first translation of the Old Testament. It was the first time that Jesus would enter Gentile territory, and getting there would have great significance. Mark reports in chapter 5 that a demon-possessed man cured by Jesus would spread the word about him among these 10 cities. His authority could not be limited to Jewish real estate alone. But first, Jesus and his student learners, and that's what the Greek means, we translated disciples, it's become sort of a religious word, but it really means student learners. They had to cross the sea, the Lake of Galilee, to get to this Gentile region. So the story is not primarily about how to navigate the storms of our individual lives, nor is it a model for how the church, symbolized in Christian art as a ship, should plow through the wind and waves of the various crises that attempt to swamp it. Rather, this account is about mission and the range, the scope, and the breadth of Jesus' authority. So back to the morning's gospel passage. Now, Israel tour guides often point out that even today, storms can suddenly develop, leaving the unprepared in great danger. But Jesus is unfazed when one of these forces of nature develops. The disciples find him in the stern of the boat, asleep on the pillow, a detail found only in Mark's version of the story. Fearing that they'll capsize and drown, his followers pose the first of these three questions. Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Are we still somewhat surprised, if not disappointed, and some maybe even offended, about reports of Jesus' humanity, needing to eat, drink, and sleep, just like us? But this is no mere nap. Jesus is truly zoned out. If I'm honest, I would have reacted the same way. How can our teacher be so calm at a time like this? Did he go to sleep knowing that storms on this lake blow over as soon as they get started? Was he confident that our specially designed boats could handle such rough weather? Jesus, we need you to do something before we all die. Why are you afraid? This is a rather insensitive reply. It's not what counselors are supposed to say to their distraught patients. It's not how professors in seminary teach prospective clergy to respond to traumatized parishioners, desperate for our help. But we shouldn't apply our modern therapeutic standards to this ancient text. We shouldn't remake Jesus into our own image. Have you still No faith? Jesus implies that they had been lacking faith all along, right up to this point. What would have been a faithful response by the disciples? Perhaps Jesus means that they should have known their Bible well enough to be calmed by the encouraging word from Psalm 107, designated for this morning. Or they could have called to mind their prior history with Jesus. He'd been rescuing people in need, starting with the healing of Peter's own mother-in-law of fever, curing leprosy, restoring a man's arm, freeing people from demonic control, forgiving their sins, teaching them about God's more excellent way of governing our lives and our loves. Given this rapid survey, we wish that one of the disciples had said to the others, "Don't worry, lads. Let our teacher sleep as long as he needs to. Because he's calm, we should be calm. He'll awaken just in the nick of time. The important thing is that Jesus is with us and there's safety in his presence." I would have liked to have been able to say that. Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? The disciples raised this question after Jesus had commanded the wind and the water to be still, using the same authoritative words with which he'd expelled the demons. That question is about identity, and it's also to do with activity. Who Jesus is can't be separated from what Jesus does. The disciples addressed Jesus as teacher, not exactly one of the high-powered titles that we use of him. Teachers and professors are on our minds these days as the school year ends. Of course, parents in our society often expect teachers to perform miracles with their students, their offspring, especially when pupils don't have the right aptitude or attitude. But we don't expect our educators to stop a hurricane or a tornado during an open-air graduation ceremony. Now, Jesus' brother, St. James, reminds his readers in chapter 5 in his letter, and us, about the prophet Elijah, who, though human, prayed, and no rain fell for 3.5 years. He prayed again, and the rain returned. So there is precedent for such human authority over the weather. But in our passage, Jesus commands the elements directly, and they submit to his authority directly. So he's more than a teacher, although not less than one. He lords it over water as well as land, which pretty much covers everything. Furthermore, the disciples should not have been all that surprised. Using his favorite term about himself, Jesus had declared the Son of Man's authority to forgive sins and to heal paralysis. He had asserted the Son of Man's lordship over the Sabbath. He determines what you do and what you don't do. Unclean spirits declared him to be the Son of God Most High. Jesus had bound Satan in the temptation, which is why he could cast out the devil's demon helpers. So, based on their prior experience with Jesus, the disciples could have been expected to stretch their understanding of him, to expand their view of his identity and power. Now, we later student learners need to answer that final question posed by the original student learners. It's almost like the gospel writer's awkward silence at the end of chapter 4 invites us to chime in. And you, dear reader, dear listener, What say you? How about we call Jesus New Adam? How about we regard him as the head or the model of a new humanity, reformed in the image and likeness of God, so at home and in touch with nature, so in line with the elements of the periodic table about which students taking science have to learn, so integrated with wind and water that he can influence them both. Now, we know that humans can have a negative impact on our planet, but we can affect it positively as well. Humans have been created in God's image, seen most vividly in Jesus. If true, we have here the key to human relationships, a way to deal with violence and injustice, but what about our relationship with nature as we engage in creation care? Do we engage in it with this larger vision of Jesus and ourselves, or are we part of a social, cultural experiment? Do we have a bigger reason for that engagement? Finally, how about this? The next time that we or our church face trials and tribulations, rather than stressing out and rushing to rouse the sleeping Jesus, what about leaving him alone for a change? Not as an act of unfaith, but just the opposite, as an act of deep faith, an act of quiet but bold confidence, because we know exactly who he is and that he is with us. Amen.